said last week, we will start each week with a song. And if you have your hand out in front of you, you have the song that we are going to sing. It is a song I sang many, many times. You've probably sang it here more than one occasion without even realizing it's a song. How many of you know the song Unto Thee, O Lord? Fabulous, okay? We're going to sing it. The words are in front of you. Unto Thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. Unto Thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. O my God, I trust in Thee. Let me not be ashamed, let not my enemies triumph over me. Verse 3. Yea, let none that wait on Thee be ashamed. Yea, let none that wait on Thee be ashamed. Oh my God, I trust in Thee. Let me not be ashamed, let not my enemies triumph over me. Verse 4. Show me Thy ways, O Lord. Teach me Thy paths, O Lord. O my God, I trust in Thee. Let me not be ashamed, let not my enemies triumph over me. Verse 7. Remember not the sins of my youth. Remember not the sins of my youth. Oh my God, I trust in Thee. Let me not be ashamed, let not my enemies triumph over me. How about that? Did you realize that was a song pretty much straight out of the King James Bible? Because I didn't for a long time. But hopefully we'll pick that up and we'll do some other songs. We might learn one or two. We might learn one next week. First things first, review. What did we learn, if anything at all, last week? What did you learn? Yeah. All right. The Psalms are songs. Okay? Broken up into books. And as Matthew said, 5 books. Which is significant to a Jew because they would have those 5 first books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, they call the Torah. So that was significant for them. That's, as he said, that was kind of like God's gift to us. And the Psalms, those 5 books are back to them. So they're broken up into 5 different books. What else? Who wrote the Psalms? A lot of people, okay? A lot of authors. That's one of the things we saw. I grew up and we talked about David. I thought David wrote all the Psalms. And again, one of the things I told you was that I thought that, David was sitting down and like Psalm 1, and that's how it went. When we talked about that chapters didn't come into our Bible until after the year 1100, right? So chapters weren't there. What they had for these Psalms were titles or the author. So we see a lot of authors. And one of the things we talked about was that the authors are different in different sections of those different 5 books, right? That David wrote almost all of book 1 and a whole lot of book 2. And even at the end of book 2, it says that's the end of the Psalms of Jesse, right? The son of David. Oh, you see? David, the son of Jesse. So there we go. That's better. Okay. So that's something we saw. Anything else that stuck out to you? Yes. Yeah, the last thing he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And that was a quote from the Psalms. Again, something everybody that was a Jew would have known. Just like, again, if I said Amazing Grace, you would be able to say how sweet the sound, right? You would know all the words. So those people at the cross that heard that, and again, that psalm pointed exactly what was going on at that time. We got some other fun stuff that's coming in a few weeks that'll make you go even bigger, okay? When I was in the 5th grade, one of the problems I had was understanding what I was going to do with the next 7 years of education, since I pretty much knew everything. Right? I was like, what am I going to be doing for these next 7 years at school? And one of the things that I realized, and probably knew at that age, was that David was a terrible poet. Right? These are the books of poetry, right? Here are the books of poetry, and I'm reading these things, and they don't rhyme, folks, right? I know good poems, right? 1 and 1 and 1 is 3. You got to be good looking, Cody, so hard to see. Come together right now over me. Right? It rhymes. That's a good poem. That's a song you can sing, right? I pick up and I read these words of David, and I just want to say he had to be a great king because he was a terrible poet. Did anybody else have a problem with that? Looking at these poems. These are books of poetry. And they just, they didn't rhyme. They didn't fit. So, forward the clock 30 years later, continuing my education, I learned apparently there's something about Hebrew poetry that's different than English American poetry. And I should have figured that when they made me do that haiku. They make you do that haiku when you were little, right? That Japanese poetry. And that was weird. Well, I guess Hebrew poetry has its own style, just like English poetry, just like Japanese poetry. The number one characteristic of Hebrew poetry is called parallelism. Parallelism. This will be on the final. Parallelism. What is parallelism? I'm going to define it as rhyming of thought. In English poetry, we rhyme words, right? Just like I did when I was doing the Beatles song. At the end of every line, the words, the actual word rhymes. In Hebrew poetry, they're not concerned so much about the words as they are the thought process. It's different. But when I think you see it, you're going to go, wow, that's pretty neat. Okay? I've given you 6 types of Hebrew poetry. All right? We made all this up, okay? This is the type of stuff that English teachers do, where they go back and they make you learn all this stuff. So it's not, again, David's not sitting down thinking, I'm going to write some synonymous parallelism, right? We came up with that term and all that later, but you'll see it and how it works pretty quickly. Let's look at that first passage. Psalm 24, verses 1 through 3. And when you get there, if you get there, I will take a volunteer to read Psalm 24, 1 through 3. Go ahead. Okay. Synonymous parallelism. If I say synonymous, what do you think? Synonym. What is a synonym? Means the same, okay? I want you to look at these three verses. Look at verse 1. The earth is the Lord's and all it contains. That's our first line, right? Let's think just like in English poetry, right? Our second line is the world and those who dwell in it. Do you see anything in line 1 that would kind of fit with the word world? Okay. What about that last phrase? All it contains. Okay. And in the second part of it, those who dwell in it, right? You see how those parallel each other. It's like he is repeating that same thought. Look at the second line. He founded it. Okay? Anything that you see that parallels in line 1 was founded it. Established it. Okay? Also in line 1, upon the seas. Can you see that? So again, that is the number one, one or two. Synthetic is also a lot, but it's the most popular type of Hebrew poetry, where I'm taking something and my first line and my second line say the same thing, right? And if I were an English teacher, I would start writing this poem down as A, B, B, C, C. Remember how you had to do that? Anybody do that when they were kids, right? So you can see first line and the second line go together. All right? So that's synonymous parallelism. We will look at a little more of that later on as we begin to look at our Psalm 1. Okay? The second type, antithetical. Synonymous means the same. If I say antithetical, what do you think I'm talking about? Opposite. Let's look at a few verses. 20, Psalm 20 and verse 8. When you get there, I'll take a volunteer. Okay? What's happened in those two lines? They're opposites, right? We know the difference between standing and falling, standing upright and falling. So again, those are opposites. 34 and 10. The young lions do lack and suffer hunger, but they who seek the Lord shall not be in want of any good thing. I don't really like that one. It's just antithetic, but it was one that somebody gave me. Yeah, okay, we'll throw it. Because you can see the difference between those who hunger and thirst, those who need things, and those who don't. So it's an opposite. One line is here, the other line says the opposite. I picked a few others because I like them that aren't necessarily in the Psalms. Ecclesiastes 10 and 2. A wise man's heart directs him to the right, but the foolish man's heart directs him toward the left. You know why I put that in, don't you? Becky and I were coming back from Holiday World last night, and I was writing, and I had my left hand, and Will was in the back seat, and he said that, a left-handed preacher, that's sinister, right? And we had a little learning session. I said, that is the most true thing. You don't know how true that is. So I had him look up. I said, Google the word origins of the word sinister. Does anybody have any idea what it is? It's from Latin, which they stole from Hebrew. The Latin, sinister, it means left. Yeah. And that actually comes from Hebrew. Yeah. In Hebrew, there's a letter that looks kind of like this. And sometimes it'll have a dot on it over here, right? Sometimes it'll have a dot over here. And one way it's called seen, and one way it's called sheen. And so the left was the sin side, sinister. And so it became associated with evil because left was bad. You wanted to be at the right hand of God, right? The sheep and the goats. There's really only one question, right? Is that God's right as we're looking at Him, or our right as we're looking at Him, right? And so I've decided I'm just going to look and see where Al is, and we'll go with that. All right? So, antithetical, it's opposite. You can see that. That's a great, Ecclesiastes and Proverbs is full of these opposites. I picked one there, Proverbs 19 and 16. Whenever you see a but in Hebrew poetry, a lot of times you can just go ahead and say that's going to be antithetical. Proverbs 19 and 16. He who keeps my commandment keeps his soul. He who is careless of conduct will die. So anytime you see a lot of those, and you see those over and over in Proverbs about what happens to the good man and what happens to the bad man. It just fits. They go with Proverbs very well. All right? The third kind is called synthetic. And synthetic originally pretty much meant everything else that wasn't covered in the first two. And the idea is it adds a description to the first line. Whatever the first line is, the second or third lines add to it. Let's look at those passages. 14, Psalm 14 and 2. And I will take a volunteer for Psalm 14 and 2. Okay. So the first line, he's looked down upon heaven, upon the sons of man, in order to determine if any understand and to see if any are seeking after God. So they just build on the first line. The second and third lines, and sometimes it'll be second, third, and fourth, build on that. The other one, 28 and 6. Blessed be the Lord, because He has heard the voice of my supplication. So that second line talks about why God is blessed. It just adds and gives a meaning onto what's happening in the first line. All right? Next one, climactic. What would you think climactic is? Exciting. What's that? It's going to build up. It's going to build up to a point. Look at 29, verses 1 and 2. Keep going. Can you see how that just boom, boom, just building up to getting to all this ascription leads to the worship, right? We're building up to that point. I like the climactic. We'll see some stuff that, and preachers like to do climactic. Martin Luther King was very good at doing these climactic things. Da-da-da-da, take one, da-da, take two, and all the way up to three. And it's a very good technique. It's ancient Hebrew is all it is. We're stealing all our material, okay? Emblematic. What's an emblem? Represents. Excellent. Represents. Look at Psalm 42 and 1. As the deer pants for the water brooks, so my soul pants for you, O God. You see how that deer and it's how it's panting for water is compared to how this person is panting and longing for God. So it's like a symbolism, but it is kind of symbolism, emblematic. If you see something and it relates to the next thing that you're starting to feel that you're wanting the person to understand. Let me give you a fun one, just because of this psalm, or we may not get back to it. Psalm 42 and 43. We talked about the idea that originally our psalms did not have chapters, right? In a Hebrew Bible, you won't see these separated. You'll see them together. And there's a reason for that. Somebody read for us Psalm 42, verse 5. Now, skip down to verse 11 and read that for us. Now skip down to 43 and read me verse 5. What happened? It's the chorus of a song. We do that all the time, don't we? Yes. Again, never noticed it for years and years and years and years. They got the verse, and here's the chorus. They got a verse, and here's the chorus. And that happens through the Psalms a lot. All right? This is one of the long ones. There are a lot of them that are just repeating. That it'll say a line, and then it'll give you the chorus. It'll say a line, and it'll give you the chorus. We'll look at that later on, but it's one of my favorite things. We see this phrase repeated, thy loving kindness lasts forever. Or sometimes we'll say, your mercy endures forever. Yes, sir. Yes. That was part of what they would do, is a responsive type reading. And we do that sometimes in different church settings where it'll, the man will stand up and say something and the people will repeat back. Well, they were just repeating the same line back. Very simple, okay? I like that phrase. I got a few minutes. The word in Hebrew is called chesed. All right? In English, you will see it looking like this. Hesed. That's a D. And loving kindness, sometimes you'll see it just as love, sometimes you'll see it as mercy. And I'm going to give you a good phrase to think of it whenever you see it is this. When you start reading and seeing it over and over in the Psalms, think of this phrase, covenant loyalty. God keeps His covenant. It expresses itself sometimes through love. It expresses itself sometimes through mercy, sometimes through loving kindness. But it is God's covenant loyalty. God makes a promise, says, I'm going to do this. He's going to do it. And that's a wonderful blessing as you're reading through the Psalms, because you'll see that word. Thy loving kindness is greater than life. Right? It's wonderful. Okay. Emblematic, last one. And this will not be on the final. This might just be an extra credit question. Chiastic. Chiastic. What is a chi? Think Greek. There you go. It's a Greek letter, and it looks like this. Okay? Looks like this. Look at Psalm 51 and 1. This is one line. Be gracious to me, O God, according to your loving kindness. There's our word. According to the greatness of your compassion, blot out my transgressions. So again, if I'm writing up the idea, these two lines, there's two sections in each line. There's an A and a B, and then it goes B and an A. Look at that. Be gracious to me, O God. Parallel to it is, blot out my transgressions. The first part of the first line goes with the last part of the second line. And the second part of the first line, right, according to your loving kindness, goes with the first part of the second line where he says, according to the greatness of your compassion. Do you see that? So again, it's just another type we see. It's fun sometimes to see it because the Jews will do this for a whole poem. Okay? And I'll give you an example. Psalm 8. We might look at another one on another day. Psalm 8. Look at verse 1 of Psalm 8. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Now I'm going to read for you verse 9. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. What's happened in this poem is we've got a big chiasm. And the idea, the key for us is that what they try to do is make the main point of this poem be in the middle of it. There are a couple of poems like this. All right, this is one of them. So if I really want to know what this poem is about, I'm going to be looking in the middle of the poem. The middle of the poem is, what is man that you take thought of him, the son of man you care for him? You've made him a little lower than the angels. You crown him with glory and majesty. So and you can see how he builds this way, puts that climax in the middle, and kind of pulls back away towards the end. Okay? So again, all this is just poetry. All right? It's all stylistic. But as you're reading, hopefully it will help. So we're going to do this morning Psalm 1. I had people request, give me a psalm that you'd like to do. And this was the first one which was requested, which is great because it is, it's a perfect song. It's almost a perfect song. Again, one of the things we talked about when we saw last week as we looked at the different books, right? Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, Book 4, Book 5. And we talked about how David is the author of almost all of Book 1, right? Anybody still have that sheet from last week? No? Yes? He's the author of almost all of Book 1. Guess which chapter he's not the author of or written to be the author of? What are we about to look at? Psalm 1. He's not picked there. It is if, and this is the thing I have, read and study about it. You'll hear them talk about Psalm 1. And was this psalm the opening, did the editors put it in to open Book 1, or did they put it in to open up the whole Psalms? Because if there's an overarching theme of the Psalms, it is found in Psalm 1. It's kind of like, let me give you a big preview of what you're going to see. All right, so let's look at Psalm 1. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. All right, go back and look at our little things. Hebrew poetry. What does it look like? What does that look like to you? It's synthetic, and in some ways it's almost climactic, but not quite. You can see it's got the first line talking about this man, and he's got him walking, standing, sitting. All right? And again, you can see how that second line, the third line, and the fourth line, they all parallel, right? They're all pretty much saying the same thing. Can I give you one more free thing? One more free thing for today. The book of Ephesians. I taught my dog, she's departed this past year, I taught my dog the book of Ephesians. She would help me teach the book of Ephesians. And it came kind of from this, because in the book of Ephesians, several things happen. It says this, that God has called us and seated us in the heavenly places. He has seated us in the heavenly places, right? And then it tells us how we're to walk. Because of this, you should walk in a certain manner. And then finally, at the end of that, it says to stand firm, right? And put on that armor of God. So I taught my dog the book of Ephesians, which Paul, who was a good Jew, might have stolen that idea from Psalm 1. I bet he did. Okay? So again, that's Psalm 1, and you can see the parallels in that poetry going on right there. Okay? Look at verse 2. His delight is in the law of the Lord. In his law doth he meditate day and night. Look at that. What do you see? Can you see that? The first part of line 1 goes with the last part of line 2, and they invert. So already we've seen synthetic, right? Synonymous, and chiastic. Let's look at the next one. He shall be like a tree planted by the river of waters that bringeth forth its fruit in its season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. Does that sound like any of these that we looked at earlier? Who said it? Emblematic, right? It's emblematic. He's going to be like a tree. And then he describes what that tree is like. It's a beautiful poem. Now, he backs up. The ungodly are not so. They are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Can you see there? More emblematic. Therefore, the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. What type do I have there? That's synonymous, right? Ungodly is tied into sinners. Standing in judgment is the idea of being in the congregation of the righteous. So again, he's repeating that same thought, that same idea. And then finally, the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. What does that sound like, look like? Antithetical. It's an opposite. So here in this first psalm, it's like the perfect psalm. He has picked and shown all these things that are characteristic of Hebrew poetry and thrown them all there together for you to see them all. And at the same time, he's giving you a great theme for the book of Psalms. What's the book of Psalms about? What's this poem about? Praising God. What? Go ahead. Difference between righteousness and wickedness, right? The righteous person and the wicked person. He's parallel and trying to. How am I going to know if a person is good and righteous? Well, what's that person going to look like? Well, that person's going to be meditating on God's law. And let's throw this one out, because this is very important for us. I grew up, and if you grew up as I did in the Church of Christ, one of the things, this was a big word, law, right? Law, right? We talk about the old law and the new law. Okay. Let's kind of forget this, okay? The word Torah, the word law, is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. We've talked about that. You've heard that your whole life, right? So let me ask you. I'm reading Genesis 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. How many laws do you see in those first 10, 15, 20 books of Genesis? None really, right? There's not laws. He didn't write law books. What he did do was this. Instructions. Torah means instruction. We think of law like a law book, right? But most of the things that you and I learned, even from this talk, right, about God was not laws. It was not the Big Ten, so to speak. It was the many stories that we heard, right? Why do we tell our kids the story of David and Goliath? Why? Show them God's power. To do what? I can't handle this situation. I'm too small. This situation's too big. What's stuck in the back of your mind? Because somebody told me a story, right? From all different perspectives, right? The things that stick in my mind. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You guys know that name? Why do you know that name? Those are the craziest names in the world. But most everybody here nodded their heads. Why do you know those names? Stories. Why did you get that story? You're going to have opportunities in life where it looks like you're going to get thrown in a fiery furnace. And they say, you can throw in the fiery furnace if you want to. Our God is able to deliver us, but if not. Right? So again, we have all this instruction. So when we're reading this, one thing I want you to understand is when they start talking about the law, they're not talking about what the Pharisees did to the Old Testament, where they turned it into 613 different rules for you to follow. It's talking about the instruction God gave about how you live your life. And Jesus says that all the time, right? Jesus telling the Pharisees one day, and John, you talked about this not too long ago. You read these scriptures, right? You read these scriptures and say, I'm going to do these scriptures, follow these scriptures. And what has Jesus said to them? What are the scriptures about? Remember? Him. You've been reading all this stuff. It's not about all these laws. Everything God has done and said and pointed you to is about me. But I don't have time. So again, the righteous man concentrates on the instruction of God, how to live my life. And that's not following a set of rules, because there's not. Okay? Paul says this in Galatians. If there had been a law by which men could be saved, salvation would have been based upon law. You heard that before? Remember that? If there had been a law by which man could be saved, salvation would be based upon law. But there was not. There was not an old law and a new law that was better than the old law, and that's what we're saved by, following the new law. We've always been saved by Paul, according to the book of Galatians, by the promise of God, by faith. That's it. Nobody was ever saved by the old law. Nobody's ever saved by the new law. all saved by Jesus. And here's the thing about it. As we read these Psalms, if you got kind of chills last week hearing Psalm 22 and realizing what was going on there, we're not through. Because you're going to see a lot of Jesus in the Psalm. Okay? We had to stop there for this week. Next week, we'll be looking at another psalm and some different types of psalms. Okay? Yes, question? Right. Mm-hmm. It can, yes. Right. It became for them natural and normal as part of the way they even spoke and thought. I'll do this and then we'll be done. Galatians. I already talked about it. Let's look at one. Paul, Jesus, Jews in general begin to think poetically. All right? It becomes part of their thought process. We talked about the idea of Western thought versus Eastern thought. The Jews have more of an Eastern thought process than a Western thought process. But part of their process, there are a couple of them, but one of them is the idea of parallelism. Let me give you this one. Galatians 3, verses 26 and 27. Here's Paul using his thought process to describe something, which when we see it, when you go, oh, now it makes sense. Okay, you ready? Verse 26. You are all sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus. All right, that's line 1. For all of you who are baptized in Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. That is a synonymous parallelism. Okay? So let me ask you this. How do we get into Christ? In verse 26. How do you get into Christ? How do you get into Christ in 27? Okay? So in Paul's mind, what does that mean about faith and baptism? Say it. They're the same thing. They go together. Does that help clear some things up for you? Yeah, it's the thought process. When he talks about baptism, and he talks about being into Christ, one way he says, well, you get into Christ through faith. And then the next one says, you get into Christ through baptism. And as a good Jew, I know what? It's the same thing. Same thing. Right? So again, there's a lot of neat things you'll see, and we'll do that. We'll look at some parallelisms in the New Testament before we get done. That's a great question. I've got to go because I'm substituting again for next week and the following week while Ward Trace is looking for a preacher. So, thank you for your time and effort. Oh, you have homework. Don't leave. You have homework. Does anybody ever listen to or know Fiddler on the Roof? Anybody? Okay, your homework this week is to go home and Google If I Were a Rich Man. And I want you to listen to that song at least twice. Okay? Okay? Google that. Listen to that song at least twice. If you don't, you'll be lost at the first part of class tomorrow and next week. And it's one of my favorite things. Is what we're going to do. Okay. Thank you.